Welcome to the podcast Who Will Save Our Planet? This is a Our Only Home podcast production, and this episode is supported by Europa-Neonet. Hello everyone, my name is Sophia, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to the second episode of Our Only Home's podcast series Who Will Save Our Planet, where we talk about inspiring projects and initiatives that are being carried out in all kinds of policy areas. In this episode, as well as in the coming two, we will talk specifically about the End the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative, also called ECI. The goal of this initiative was to change the regulations on how farm animals are held, as they are often crammed into small cages, but we will learn more about that. If you are wondering what an ECI is, I suggest you to listen to our first episode, where I introduced the mechanism and presented some interesting initiatives. In today's episode, I'm really happy to welcome a guest, actually our first guest on this podcast, who will provide interesting insights about the status quo of animals' rights in the EU, Peter Höffken. He works for the animals' rights organization Peta in Germany as an author and campaign team leader, and he will give us the needed background information regarding the End the Cage Age initiative today. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak here.
Yeah, I'm sure that many of our listeners have actually already heard about Peter as an organization before, but maybe we can start with a short introduction about the organization and also about yourself.
Yes, Peter, that means People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And this is an important issue because we are not fighting for making cages bigger, but we want empty cages. And this is important in today's discussion because for us, End of the Cage Age is a step towards a society where animals are not being used by humans, whether in small cages or in big cages or in no cages. And this is an important distinction. And PETA exists for over 3 decades. And I'm working for 11 years with PETA right now as a campaign specialist. And I'm situated in Stuttgart.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you mentioned already today's topic, the cages, or basically ending the cages, because it will be about the End the Cage Age initiative. And this initiative was launched in 2018, initiated by the British animal rights organization Compassion in World Farming. And as the title suggests, this initiative wants to stop cage farming in the whole European Union, which actually seems like a huge goal to reach. And indeed it is. According to Eurostat, the statistics agency of the European Union, there were 146 million pigs and 76 million bovine animals, like cattle, and 75 million sheep and goats farmed in the EU in 2020. And most of them are held for meat production and other commercial purposes like milk or wool production. So often these animals live in really small cages without enough space to move around, and many of them will never see the sun during their lives. And as agriculture in the EU has constantly become more efficient, there's really high competition between farmers and large agricultural businesses, and this often goes at the expense of animal welfare. So this European Citizens Initiative was really successful, with more than 170 NGOs supporting it and with almost 1.4 million collected signatures. So we will learn more about that in the coming minutes and episodes. Today we're talking about the current status quo in cage farming in keeping animals. So what is allowed, what is common, how are the animals actually treated, and why did so many organizations sign the initiative? And as a first topic, let's talk about why did Peta Germany, and I also believe that other country branches of Peta, decided to support End the Cage Age. So why did your organization decide to support this initiative?
We supported the European Citizens Initiative because we were aiming for 2 positive effects. And one is that, of course, the animals who are living in cages are relieved from this very bad life, a life of suffering, a very short life in very sad circumstances. And so this is a direct positive effect. The other positive effect is because we want empty cages and we want now animals being eaten and used for as nutrition. We are aiming for a second positive effect. If the cages are prohibited, then of course the costs of keeping animals in agriculture are rising, and that probably leads to higher prices for production, higher prices in the supermarkets, and at the end of the day, less consumption of animals. And whatever goes into the direction of more obstacles for people who keep animals, to breed animals for eating, we are supporting this because at the end of the day, it could have the positive effect of less consumption.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about how are animals actually currently held in the EU. So, which animals are held in cages? Which animals are we talking about? And also, could you tell us a little bit more about the current rules on farming these animals in the EU?
The European Citizens Initiative has aimed for certain animal species. I'm just naming a few: laying hens, rabbits, uh, quails, ducks, and geese, and some others. And because those are the animals that are kept actually in tiny cages in millions and hundreds of millions of animals in all the EU countries. And we are talking about sows who are kept in small crates. And we are talking about calves who are uh, kept in calf pens where they can barely move. And actually, it's very sad that such an initiative has to be started because it's very cruel to keep these animals in the way that the European Union allows it at this point. So let me just give you an example. We do have already directives for certain animals, like the minimum standards for the protection of pigs. And it's a directive from the year of 2008. And you are allowed to keep a sow on 2.25 square meters her whole life already. And of course, this is animal abuse, and it's a shame actually for European Union countries and for the EU as a whole to allow such torture. And we are not talking about cages in this respect, but what comes along with the keeping of those animals are a lot of other types of abuses. I'm still staying at the animal species of pigs, and there are a lot of painful operations allowed on pigs to adjust them to the keeping systems. So it's not like that the farmers are saying, okay, we have an animal with certain needs and we keep it according to its needs. No, they say we have certain amount of space and a certain amount of money, and we are adjusting the animals to these keeping systems using operations like amputations. So it is actually allowed to reduce the teeth of the piglets without anesthesia. It's allowed to cut off the tails of very young pigs, even without anesthesia, before the seventh day of life, and some other issues like this. So you can see that although we do have a regulation in the European Union for certain animals, it still does not protect the animal from abuse. And if you go a step further and think if the Cage Age initiative is successful and keeping these animals in cages is not allowed anymore, we still have a huge number of other problems that are and other abuses that are done to these animals, and that is the reason why we do actually not really call for end of cage age, but in the end, we are fighting for ending the era of eating animals as a whole.
Yeah, it really sounds so horrible. And actually, I think this also explains why so many organizations supported this initiative. And also, I mean, people signed it, but like the animal organizations that work with these topics on a day-to-day basis, they really like united to speak with one voice and fight for a change in these regulations. I would like to know a bit more about what does end the cage age mean by phasing out cage farming? I know that PETA as an organization would like to basically reduce all cages and just not hold any animals anymore, but realistically speaking, people will not stop consuming animal products from one day to the other. So how can we imagine alternative systems to cages? What would be possible to change in the next years?
Well, I'm not promoting on like free range keeping systems in this context because it still involves a lot of other abuses. But it's a clear, it's actually what we are expecting from this initiative is that the very bad keeping systems are soon to be history. If you talk about cages, we maybe in Germany think back to laying hens. This was a big issue about over decades that hens have been kept in very small cages. And actually, the European Union has prohibited the keeping of hens in that way. But what we got after this is rarely any better because at the moment we have a regulation in Germany which allows the keeping of hens on the size of one A4 paper, which is not much better than the cage keeping before. So what we have to the lobby and within the agricultural lobby within the European Union is very strong, and we have to take care that the end of the cage age keeping of animals does not result in any similar systems like we've seen this before. So, but for the millions and millions of rabbits, for example, or ducks who are really kept in small cages, we expect improvements, which would in the end hopefully lead to a distinct reduction in numbers of animals that are kept because it's more expensive to keep animals better than they actually do. And that would make it less profitable for a lot of farmers. And so this whole process could actually lead to less animals in agriculture and, of course, also to eating less animals by consumers because the prices are getting higher. And this is the main positive effect that we hoping for at the end of this process, which, by the way, will only be become more precise in the coming years. So just by implementing this European initiative, the political leaders don't have a clear order to change anything, but they just have to consider changing the keeping systems, and they announced actually until 2027 to come up with proposals, which is quite late actually.
Yeah, yeah. You already mentioned the farmers and also the politicians. So I'm actually wondering how would the new systems, however they will look like, be financed? Has the EU or any national politicians, have they already specified where the money would come from? Because of course the farmers would need to be supported in that. And also the EU would kind of need to make sure that the farmers are not outcompeted by cheaper imports where animal welfare standards play a lesser role. So has there anything be said about how these new alternatives could be financed?
Actually, this is one task of the European Union that they have to come up with, and I haven't heard of any sound or valid financing system. We from Peter think that actually the farmers should pay themselves to keep animals because they're making their living out of these animals. And so we hope in the end that the price tag for meat products or animal products will become much higher in the future. And that would have a lot of positive effects. So imagine um, any type of meat would be 50% more expensive in the supermarkets. What would happen in the end? We would have less consumption, and people are eating too much meat anyway, so they are eating too much meat for their own body, which causes a lot of health problems. They are eating too much animal products for the planet. We have the rainforest problem, we have the climate change crisis. So we have a lot of animal production related crises in the world. Uh, Not talking about air quality, groundwater, soils. So there's a huge array of problems associated with animal production. And if the price tag would become distinctively higher, we would have only positive effects. We would have positive effects for the health of people. We would have positive issues for the health of the planet and of course for the animals, because we think that this would in the end lead to a reduction of consumption and less animals being kept in abuse. And this is, I think this is how it works and how it should be in the end. And in Germany, we have the same discussion at the moment on the political level, and there are more and more politicians who say, no, we can't go on like this, and we need higher prices for animal products because it does no good to anybody.
Yeah, you already mentioned that the European Commission committed to change or implement the changes by 2027. So, yeah, you said that's quite late, but yeah, it's in 5 years. I guess it's always relative. If you change a whole system, maybe it's actually quite early. So, do you think that it's realistically possible to end the cage age within the next 5 years? Because for me, that seems actually quite soon when you think about changing something in so many different countries.
The European Union consists of so many countries, and they usually meet only on a level where each country can agree to any measures, which means, and we have a lot of countries in the European Union where agriculture is very important and has a very large proportion of their economy. So we usually have countries who are on the side who are slowing down the process, and because the European Union can't really and don't want to imply restriction on countries who don't want to comply. And that is a huge problem. The European Citizens Initiative is a signal for lawmakers on the EU level, but also in all the countries, to that the population is not happy with the way animals are kept at the moment. But it is no binding instrument for lawmakers, so they don't have to change laws. But I think that most of them have understood that they have to come up with something significant, which actually eases the suffering tremendously of a lot of animals within the European Union agricultural system. And I think the ECI, which is the European Citizens Initiative, is a good instrument to make a symbol, to make a stand for animal welfare, and to show the lawmakers that the society as a whole uh, don't want the cruelty that is done to the animals any longer. But speaking about how realistic any concrete changes are, that we know that the European Union is very slow implementing new laws. And when they say 2027, I wish they would implement significant changes by that date. And I think it's up to NGOs like PETA and all the other NGOs to yeah, look on their fingers, to always remind them that they have made a promise and to take them by their word. But for us, it is clear that this can only be a first step into a society where animals are not considered as being there for people for eating, and that is a long way to go. But the 2027 mark will be a very important milestone, which we hope we can accomplish.
And what do you think our listeners can do if they now think, I want to support the End the Cage Age initiative, but the signature collection is done. So is there something you think that they can still do to contribute to ending the cage age?
We are usually encouraging supporters and citizens to directly contact their own lawmakers where they live, actually their politician in the regional or in the national parliament, which comes from their region, to write them an email, to ask them about this initiative, but to ask them also, what are you doing to end the suffering of the animals on transports, in the slaughterhouses, which is, by the way, not addressed by this citizens initiative. So we have a lot of other animal problems related to agriculture on top of keeping animals in cages. And this is why we promote a plant-based diet. And so in the end, what every citizen, what every person can do on its own is saving about 100 animals each year by just not eating them, and by sparing them alive and suffering in the slaughterhouses, in cages, on transports, by just taking or picking plant-based alternatives in the supermarket. And that is actually the strongest sign that you can make to show the economy and the politics that you are rejecting the animal system like it exists right now.
I agree. I think it's very important to also know about some individual steps that you as a person can take, because otherwise the system can feel quite inaccessible. And picking a plant-based alternative is really quite an easy step that you can take if you want to say, I reject the system as it is today. And hopefully that will make a change for the future, also, for the animals in the long run. And let's hope that these discussions and this topic will become more and more frequent in politics, but also just in societal debates in the future. I think it has already gained visibility, but as we could also learn today, there's still a lot of mistreatment and just, not really right treatment of animals in agriculture at the moment. I would like to thank you for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot, at least I learned a lot, and it's always interesting to get the perspective of an NGO working with these topics. So thanks again for joining today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
So this was the second episode of Our Only Homes podcast series, Who Will Save Our Planet? I hope you learned a little bit more about the current EU standards and regulations in keeping animals in agriculture, and also why NGOs such as Peta Germany support and initiate ECIs such as End the Cage Age. In the next episode, we will move on from the status quo of how animals are currently held in the EU towards the process of organizing and carrying out a European Citizens Initiative. I will talk to someone from the organization that initiated End the Cage Age, Compassion in World Farming, which is a UK-based animals' rights organization. We will learn about the process of carrying out an ECI, the major challenges and surprises along the way, and what it means to be responsible for an initiative that is supported by so many people in the EU. I hope you will join me again next time to get insights about the ECI process of End the Cage Age. This podcast episode is supported by Europa-Now-Net, and if you want to read a bit more about the topic, you can find relevant links in the show notes of the episode. My name is Sophia, and if you have any questions or comments, do not hesitate to contact me on sophia@ouronlyhome.eu.